Anna's fingers brushed against a rogue skein of wool wedged behind her dresser, dusty, forgotten, like her first winter in New York. 15 years ago, that peacock blue yarn had been her lifeline, clutched tight as she navigated subway turnstiles and farmers' markets, where apples cost more than back home. Now 55, she smirked its fuzziness, same as her accent. But that tangled thread held magic, memories of cold evenings soothed by rhythmic clicks, scarves woven with determination. Strangers turned stitch sisters in her basement, knitting. Anna's fingers brushed against a rogue skein of merino wool, its fibers still carrying faint scent of lavender from her old village apothecary. 55 years of calluses didn't soften away its uneven texture, snagged, just like her accent, stubbornly clinging to vowels no one here could place. New York's farmers' markets buzzed around her, all kale chips and artisanal kombucha, while she fumbled with a clumsy step over a crack in sidewalk. Assimilation, she'd learned, was less about fitting in and more about pretending not to notice when you stuck out. But needles clicked comfort into chaos. Every Thursday, her knitting circle, a ragtag crew of newcomers with mismatched grammars and shared hesitations, transformed a Brooklyn community center into something lit. Skeins became safety nets, each stitch a silent me too. Anna's deepest fear, that she'd unravel entirely if she stopped moving, loosened its grip whenever wool slid through her hands. She'd once spun grief into a shawl after her mother passed. Now, she knit resilience into scarves for strangers. Laughter bubbled up as someone dropped a stitch again, and Anna grinned, rolling her eyes. Age had its perks, fewer FCKs given, more wisdom woven in. Wool, warm and forgiving, anchored her to a past that wasn't lost, just remade. One purl at a time. Anna's fingers brushed against a rogue skein of merino wool, its peony hue unraveling just enough to snag on her sweater cuff. She chuckled, 55 years young, yet still fumbling like a kid with tangled yarn. That skein had traveled farther than she had, died in some distant mill before landing in this Brooklyn farmer's market bin. A metaphor, maybe, for how life knits loose ends into something whole. Between stalls of overpriced kale and artisanal honey, she spotted a flyer, Stitch and Belong knitting circle for newcomers. Below, a lopsided doodle of a sweater with sleeves hugging a globe. Anna hesitated. Her needles hadn't clicked since Minsk, where neighbors traded patterns like gossip. But here? Her English still tripped over consonants, and subway maps might as well have been hieroglyphics. Yet that stubborn merino seemed to wink from her tote bag. Try, it whispered. First meeting was in a church basement that smelled of coffee and damp wool. Women hunched over half-finished scarves, their laughter stitching air. A Ghanaian grandmother tensioned her thread like a pro, while a Guatemalan teen fumbled a dropped stitch. Anna's palms dampened. Then, whoosh, a ball of cobalt yarn rolled toward her feet. Yours? A silver-haired Puerto Rican woman grinned, nudging it with her orthopedic shoe. We're all tanglers here. Turns out, yarn didn't care about accents. Knitting became Anna's Rosetta Stone. She learned lit meant more than light bulbs, and Brooklynites would trade kombucha for her borscht-stained mittens. That first scarf? A Frankenstein of uneven tension, but Syrian pharmacist beside her called it abstract art and requested a matching hat. Slowly, Anna's stitches tightened, not just in wool, but in belonging. One Tuesday, she brought extra skeins dyed with beet juice, just like back home. Teen gasped, "This color's fire." Anna beamed. Maybe assimilation wasn't about erasing threads, but weaving them into something new. That merino skein, once tangled in her sleeve, now anchored a communal blanket stretched across their laps, each square a story, each dropped stitch proof they dared to try. Anna's fingers brushed against a rogue skein of wool, its vibrant cerulean hue clashing with muted grays in her basket. 55 years old and stubborn as ever, she refused to let jet lag win. New York's farmers' markets had become her battleground, not for produce, but for connection. Each skein was a tiny rebellion against isolation, a lifeline spun from fiber and sheer will. Her knitting circle, dubbed Stitch and Belong, started as a fluke. A misplaced pearl led to conversation with a woman from Oaxaca, their laughter unraveling language barriers. Soon, newcomers crowded her tiny apartment, needles clicking in sync with shared stories. Anna's own missteps, mispronounced words, subway mishaps became punchlines, not shame. She leaned into absurdity, a middle-aged woman teaching a Syrian grandmother to knit mittens in July. But doubt crept in like drop stitches. Was this enough? Skeins piled up, unsold market stalls. Then one frigid morning, a teenager from Minsk wrapped herself in Anna's oversized scarf, whispering spasiba with reddened cheeks. That scarf, lumpy and imperfect, had lit a spark. Anna doubled down, bartering wool for spices, trading patterns like secrets. Her hands, now calloused, wove more than yarn, they stitched a safety net. By spring, Stitch and Belong spilled into a community center. Anna smirked irony. She'd crossed an ocean to find home, only to build one for others. That first rogue skein? Still tucked in her bag, a reminder that loose ends could anchor a life. Anna's fingers brushed against a rogue skein of wool, its deep crimson hue bleeding into her palms like a promise. For months, she'd wrestled with English verbs, subway maps, and unspoken rules of Brooklyn farmers' markets where apples cost more than her weekly groceries back home. But here, in this cramped community center basement, her knitting needles clicked a language she understood, one that didn't demand perfect grammar, only patience. Tonight was different. A local influencer, all sharp elbows and skeptical glances, had wandered into their knitting circle, phone poised to capture quaint immigrant hobbies for content. Anna ignored her, focusing instead on intricate cable pattern she dared to attempt a first. Each twist of yarn felt like defiance. "I'm writing my own story," she thought, grinning as she fumbled a stitch, then fixed it with a veteran's sly ease. Then, disaster. A sneeze sent her wool skein tumbling, unraveling mid-row. Influencer snorted. But Anna didn't panic. Instead, she improvised, weaving runaway thread into an unexpected flourish, transforming a mistake into a bold, asymmetrical design. Room held its breath. Even skeptics' manicured fingers froze over her screen. By morning, that unplanned masterpiece had gone lit. Someone had posted a close-up of Anna's work, gnarled hands and all, next to a caption about resilience. Strangers flooded comments. "This is art. This is New York." Requests poured in for her to teach a class. Next week's gathering, newcomers arrived clutching wool-like talismans, their eyes bright with recognition. Anna, 55 and unstoppable, handed out needles, her crimson skein now a shared flag of belonging. No one cared about accents here. Just rhythm of creation, one stubborn stitch at a time. Anna's fingers brushed against a rogue skein of wool, its vibrant hue clashing with her muted sweater, proof even chaos could be beautiful. New York's farmers' markets buzzed around her, strangers haggling over heirloom tomatoes while she wrestled with tangled yarn and a tangled life. 55, she'd expected assimilation to feel like slipping into worn slippers, not scaling a glacier in socks. But needles click solutions faster than Duolingo ever could. Her knitting circle began as 3 stiff chairs in a Brooklyn community center, where hesitant hands fumbled with cast-ons and accents. Soon, scarves grew alongside confidence, stitches tightening gaps between languages. Anna guided a Syrian grandmother through a pearl row, their laughter weaving thicker than any fair isle. Skeins piled up like shared victories, a Peruvian teen's first hat, a Ukrainian widow's shroud for grief. Each loop whispered, "You belong here." By winter, their creations lit up local boutiques, tagged with stories instead of prices. Anna's odd habit of humming Soviet nursery rhymes while knitting became their anthem, a quirky reminder that roots could stretch without snapping. That wool, once a solitary comfort, now bound a tribe. Thread your needle, craft connection where others see knots.